So cuts and bulks are good at keeping people focused as
Hmm.
far as the nutrition and the diet are concerned, because you have a short-term goal, and you're going to work really, really hard to get to that. And that
Yeah.
goal changes a lot. So it keeps people a little bit more focused on the long-term thing.
Wits and Weights community, welcome to another episode of the Wits and Weights podcast. Today, we're diving into how to optimize your health and performance with Dustin Lambert. He's a fellow nutrition coach that I met through the Wits and Weights Facebook group and our coaching cert connection with NCI. Dustin's going to share challenges and strategies for fat loss as you get leaner, the pros and cons of bulking and cutting versus maingaining, and unique issues to consider when you have a metabolic disorder or autoimmune disease. He'll also tell us the optimal protein and sodium intake for strength and hypertrophy, the impact of red meat, saturated fat, and cardio on health outcomes and performance. And we may even get into things like blood work, tendinitis, wearable fitness trackers, AI chatbots like ChatGPT. Dustin Lambert is an NCI certified nutrition coach in the Houston area. He's also a strength and conditioning coach, and he specializes in helping people manage metabolic disorders and autoimmune disease, correct their blood lipid profiles, prevent cardiovascular disease, lose fat, and restore health using barbells and periodized nutrition programming. Dustin's also a full-time husband and father, part-time hot rod builder, and once a Marine, always a Marine. All right, Dustin, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Philip.
Cool. So you and I met through Facebook. I think I invited you to my group, the Wits and Weights community, and you've
Mm-hmm.
been super engaged. And we've been chatting back and forth over the months. We're like, let's just have you on because you're an expert. You've got a lot of cool specialties, I'll say, in your coaching approach. Some of it alluded to in the intro. Now, we're both certified coaches with NCI. We both love barbell training, periodization, using data, optimizing your health. Given all that, okay, the big question I want to know, what is your purpose here? What is your purpose as a man and as a coach with all of this? And why is that important to you?
Ooh, yeah, right out of the gate. Man. So my purpose as a man, so going through all of this and starting to help people get healthy, and address these, kind of major medical issues that they're having, has really made me take a step back and, kind of appreciate my family a little bit more, and realize, a lot of the reasons why I started lifting and why I started eating healthier, and getting into all of this was because, I wanted to be able to play with my daughter. So I had, my wife and I had my daughter at a little bit of a later age, not too late, but I'm probably going to be in my 5 zeros when she graduates high school. So I want to be around for that. I want to be active, and I want to be, a part of her life. I don't want to be relegated to the recliner. So going through all of that has made me, take a step back, remember why I started all of this, and, reevaluate some of the things I'm doing in my life and how I manage my days, and just try and do more things with my family.
Yeah, and I can relate so much to that. I think we're probably similar in age and parenting age as well. My kids just turned 11 and 9, and I'm 42, so that puts me in somewhat that ballpark, maybe not quite, but I understand, right? Like it's these things in life that really matter, and as you get older, it's no longer about the silly things we pursued in our 20s. Let's be honest,
Hmm.
right? And which you had to pursue as a young guy, trying to build things and
Yeah.
meet people and whatnot, but the idea that you're creating a legacy and you want to be physically there, which translates to everything else, your mental and emotional health and everything else. So given that's where you are now, how did you lead to that over the last, let's say since your 20s or 30s, how did you get here?
Yeah, so I was always really active. I played a lot of sports in high school. I mean, maybe not a lot, but I definitely wasn't not doing something.
Mhm.
So I was always active. And when I got out of high school, I went right into the Marines, and that's a super active, um, field to be in. When I left the Marines, I went to school and, learned, mechanics, and all that stuff. And I kind of let the physical um, pursuits go. And that just kind of carried on for a while. I met my wife and we got married. And then, one day we both kind of just decided like, hey, man, we need to do something. We need to get back in shape. We need to start eating right. We started doing some videos on, I don't know if it was Beachbody or something. I don't know, like that. We started there.
P90X, something like that,
Yeah,
right?
P90X something. I don't remember. But so I was doing like rows with the 5-gallon water jug. And yeah. So we started that. And somewhere along the way, I started listening to a political podcast. And the guy on there kept referencing Mark Ripito, starting strength, Mark Ripito, starting strength. And so one day I was like, man, I'm going to look this guy up. So I put it into the old Google thing and picked up some YouTube videos, and I watched the first one, and I heard him talking. I think he was on a podcast interview, and he was talking about, everything that's in the Starting Strength book. And I just kind of like the light bulb went on. And I've always been a really skinny guy. I'm what we in the biz call a hard gainer. Mm-hmm. So as he started laying out this path, I was like, oh, this is the information that I've been looking for my whole life. And so, I got under the squat bar the first time, and have been doing it for the better part of 10 years now.
Yeah.
It's been a minute.
Yeah, man. I mean, once people discover barbells, and I don't care who you are, how old you are, what you've done in the past. I mean, I've seen it with my clients. I've seen, women who are 50 who've never picked up a barbell and they're open to it, and then they do it. And it's like, just everything changes. I mean, it's not just physical, right? It's mental. And, I wonder now that you're a coach, right? You're applying a lot of these principles and philosophies that you have, including with the barbell training. How do you know that's the right thing to do, and how do you measure the success and impact, right? We're NCI coaches. Part of what we learned is, connection-based coaching, making an impact. How do you measure that?
Man, that's I think that's one of the hardest things for me, is gauging how much impact I'm having in someone's life. I definitely am doing this to make an impact. I'm not trying to get rich. So yeah,
that's a good thing to clear up, man, because people are like, oh, I'm gonna get into coaching, and $10K a month right from month one, and
nope,
it doesn't work that way.
Yep, lots of free coaching going on. So how to gauge that? I don't know. I think I try and help my clients continually, month to month and quarter to quarter and year to year. I have a lot of long-term clients. And I think it helps to remind them just how far they've come from day one. Mm-hmm. And so, you're a starting strength guy, so you have the logbook. So I always have people start out with a logbook, or they have the online app that we use. And, whenever they're feeling hard or down or wondering if this is the right direction or whatever, I say, let's go back to day one. Mm-hmm. Let's remember where you were.
It's good. Yeah. That's the facts, right? That's like where you were and where you are.
Yep.
Which is why we collect data, because, there are people that for whatever reason, chide the use of data, whether it's food tracking or tracking your workouts or what have you. And, I don't know why, maybe the inconvenience of it, or because it's uncomfortable, or it's something different, or people don't like data, whatever it is. But once you do, I mean, it pales in comparison to not doing that, and what you fail to achieve when you don't do that. That's just my opinion. So anyway, let's jump into the topics, because I know we wanted to talk about some fun things. Like, you and I lately have been going through fat loss phases in parallel, right?
Yeah.
You're still on yours, or are you done with it yet?
I am trying to squeeze out the last remaining bit. So I have a cruise. We're going to Mexico at the end of the month. So I didn't get my goal. So I'm on a little bit of a break right now, and I'm going to try and squeeze a few more weeks out of it. But
squeeze it out. All right. Yeah. Make sure to get that last week or two, right, to get the carbs back. Yeah, fill it up. So it's funny because you're more of a, you're a stronger, bigger guy than me based on your experience where we are. Not comparing. I'm just saying that's a fact. So for me, losing fat now was was kind of easy, but I'm also not trying to get to that like sub 10% or around
Mm,
10% body fat because I need to go build more mass. But for people who are thinking of losing fat, want to lose fat, currently trying to lose fat, with all the challenges that brings, right? And I've talked about it a million times on this podcast. We don't have to like lay out all the challenges. I think the big ones are metabolic adaptation, hunger, loss of strength. But what's your take on this? Why does it become harder maybe in the different phases, right? Initially, maybe it's not so hard, but once you get into it, and then as you said, trying to squeeze that last bit, why does it get so hard? And then how can you keep making progress to finish it up?
mm. Yeah, so it gets harder. I mean, simply it comes down to the metabolic adaptations, and also as you lose body mass, body tissue, it just simply doesn't require as much energy as it did before to go through day to day. So as you drop weight, your TDEE is going to go down despite how active you may want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a continuing challenge. And I really like the analogy. I can't remember where I heard it from, but weight loss or fat loss is kind of like wringing out a wet towel. And the first time you take that towel and you dunk it underwater and it comes back out, it's fully saturated.
Yeah.
The first time you go to get water out of there, it's really easy. And it just doesn't matter what you do to it. You can twist it, you can spin it around, you can squeegee it between your thumb and your forefinger, and you're going to get a lot of water out of that thing the first time. And I think that's probably most people's experience with fat loss or weight loss in general. And that can lead people to think that they know more about it than they actually do.
Mm.
But yeah, so it really does come down to the metabolism in how that thing, how it gets harder and harder and harder the closer and closer you get to being whatever your goal is.
Yeah, and is it and of course I'm playing devil's advocate because I want to hear your take on this as the expert, but um is it purely the hunger and the symptoms that come from that when you get further in? So where I'm going with that is you might start at a metabolism of, let's say you burn 2,500 calories. And so you want to burn, you want to lose a pound a week. So you're 500 calorie deficit. And so you're eating 2,000 calories. Most people hearing that are like, yeah, that's fine. Some people would love to lose fat on 2,000, and others are like, yeah, that's fine. That's normal. And as you adapt, right, your metabolism drops and drops and drops. And before long, you're maybe at 16, maybe at 1,500, you're starting to push that limit. Is that all? Is that what it comes down to? Is just our body is now like starved for resources, and we're also so hungry? Is that the main challenge, or are there other things involved?
I think that's probably the main challenge that people fight against. You're definitely going to have some hormonal changes that are happening due to that, which is why we periodize our nutrition, is so that we can, have an exit strategy for all of that and come out of it and fix it. But yeah, from my experience and, just dealing with this with clients, I think the biggest thing people deal with is hunger. Also the mental aspect of it. So as the longer and longer you do it for, the more and more plateaus you start to see, the more challenging the thing becomes. You're not seeing the progress that you were in the beginning. If you have a lot of weight to lose, you can drop 12 pounds in a week, and you run that for 12 weeks, and now maybe it's 2 pounds. And that can be quite frustrating, and you don't understand why that's happening.
Yeah. So you mentioned multiple plateaus. We use things like diet breaks and other things to take that mental break, right? Because like you said, it's mainly mental. We can't trick or over recover our metabolism. Like, it is what it is. So, even if you get back to where you were 2 weeks ago, it's just going to come right back and adapt. What's some of your favorite go-tos when it comes to that? Is it taking diet breaks? Are there other strategies people might try so that they don't just fall off the rails and say, wow, this isn't working anymore?
I like diet breaks, refeeds for some people. And so I definitely try and so if someone is utilizing tracking, counting calories or macros or whatever method of restriction we're doing, I don't want them to stop that, because you don't want to get out of the habit. So we're just taking a break. We're not on hiatus. We're just kind of, allowing you to get back in the game.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. So do they still track while taking a break, or are they also taking a
Yes.
break from tracking?
No, they still track while
That's what you were
taking a
saying.
break.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. That makes sense. And this is at maintenance, basically by upping the carbs. Is that your main strategy for that, or is there another approach?
Yeah, so the carbs will come up, mostly carbs. It depends on what somebody's craving. So sometimes people are jonesing for, I don't know, whatever, chocolate or something. Like, all right, well, we'll go ahead and allow some fat in here. But I generally try and do bump up the carbs. That way they start feeling a little bit better through their workouts, and they also start maybe seeing and feeling a little bit more pump from the lifting, and that can help adjust their attitude. They're like, oh no, actually I'm starting to look pretty good.
Yeah. Especially if they drink that large glass of water before they lift too, right? Well, it's good that you mentioned not only the diet break itself, but also the ability to maybe eat some indulgences or some things that you enjoy that you kind of you've been avoiding, with that discipline, because we like to balance the lifestyle with the discipline, knowing that there's some compromises you have to make in fat loss. But like you said, if you haven't had that chocolate for 4 or 6 or 8 weeks, and all of a sudden you've got a little extra calories and it is more fat, so what? Go for it, enjoy it. Kind of again, that mental side. All right. So you mentioned periodization. One form of periodization that many people are familiar with is cuts and bulks, right? Some people don't like the terms, but whatever. We all understand what we mean, right? Fat loss versus building muscle. I just finished my diet, so now I'm at maintenance, ready to build muscle, which I just love that side of it, right? Especially because it's a lot. If you do it right, it's a lot more of the year than losing fat. So what are, but some people say, well, you shouldn't be switching back and forth always. Can't you ever just maintain? What are the pros and cons of cuts and bulks versus maintaining, or the word you threw in here, maingaining, which implies like very lean gaining? What's your thoughts on all of this, and when do you recommend them?
Yeah, so I think as far as recommendations goes, it's gonna come down to the individual and kind of maybe how I'm feeling initially. And plans can always change. You can start one direction and somebody's like, I absolutely hate this. All right, well, let's do it this other way. There's not just one way to do it. So some pros and cons. So the maingaining, or I've heard it called gaintaining too, that can be a little bit easier if you don't really like tracking, you don't really like counting stuff. You're kind of good at maybe limiting or moderating some unhealthier choices in your food, or maybe things that don't necessarily get you closer to your goal. And definitely if you were, starting a strength training regimen, and you really had a plan to do this for 9 months to a year or something like that, then maingaining may be a viable option for you. The pros, those are the pros. The cons to maingaining is that you really don't see a lot of progress happening very quickly. So if just watching the number on the scale go up slowly over time or down, and really focusing on building strength or developing technique in your lifts, or maybe you're a runner and you're trying to, go for a 10K or a marathon or something like that, and you're really focused on your athletic performance, that can be a sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. So your point is it doesn't maximize your progress when it comes to building muscle. So, but it could be a good alternative if you have other goals that aren't specifically maximizing your progress.
Yeah. So if you're focused on your athletic performance, and not so much really what you're seeing in the mirror, maingaining can be a good tool to use there. So you're not stringing yourself too short, doing too much at one time.
Yeah.
The cuts and the bulks, I think, is probably better for somebody who's maybe, 2 years or 3 years into their lifting journey. And you're really trying to develop a good physique, or you're really trying to get a significant amount of body fat down in a short period of time. So cuts and bulks are good at keeping people focused, as far as the nutrition and the diet are concerned, because you have a short-term goal, and you're going to work really, really hard to get to that. And that
Yeah.
goal changes a lot. So it keeps people a little bit more focused on the long-term thing.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, that even though we don't want quick fixes for any of this stuff, we want to change our lifestyle. We have the long term, the ultimate goal is our health and all the things that we get for that health, like you mentioned with your kids and being a father and so on. And that's really what a lot of people want. At the same time, as humans, we have a terrible attention span, right? And we like to have quick wins. So it sounds like breaking it down to that shorter goal could be a really good motivator, breaking it down to even shorter goals than that in terms of your habits. All of those things are really good strategies for doing this, which is gives people hope. Because I think a lot of people go through life, they're like, well, I'm a little heavy on the scale. I need to go on a diet. And it's this on off switch, and there's not really any structure or drive to do it the right way. Okay. So the maingaining is good for in some cases, but if you really want, more efficient results in terms of physique, you may want to be going for a specific short-term goal. I want to get into some of the things that make your coaching unique. You talk about metabolic disorders, autoimmune diseases. I have like an undifferentiated mixed connective tissue disease, which is autoimmune disease. And very interestingly, last year, after I had titrated down a medication I take for that, I started to get swelling in my wrists and ankles, which is symptomatic. People who have rheumatoid arthritis sometimes get that, right? And other autoimmune diseases. And man, it was just a huge disruption to my lifting, because you felt weak in your grip and in your feet when everything else was strong. It's a very odd thing. So I'm curious for you, what are the unique challenges clients face when trying to achieve fat loss with these kinds of disorders?
Yeah. So I can't speak for everybody, but the clients that I have that kind of tell me about the symptoms and the challenges and all the things that they're facing, one of the biggest things across everything, across all these diseases, is the amount of fatigue and muscle soreness that people experience. And I know, Gen Pop, we like to say that I'm fatigued or whatever, but this is different. It is not the general state of tiredness that people are experiencing from crappy jobs and junk sleep. I've had several clients tell me that what they are experiencing could be akin to climbing a mountain. So if you were to spend all day mountain climbing, the amount of physical exhaustion and just the bone deep soreness, muscle soreness, achy joints, all that stuff that you would experience from that's what they go through on a daily basis. And sometimes that lasts for weeks, months even.
Yep.
So that's definitely a big challenge across all of them. That can be extremely challenging to program for as well. So those are challenges in all of it. You mentioned the medication. So a lot of people are on medications. And a lot of those medications that are addressing one part of their disease or disorder will often make it a little bit increase their risk for some other aspect of it. So like for metabolic syndrome, if somebody has high blood lipids, they might be put on a statin or something like that. And certain things can increase your risk of type 2 diabetes, which is, blood glucose is another part of that, which is kind of the thing you're trying to avoid out of this. Same thing
for the listener, right? Metabolic disease being pre-diabetes.
Pre-diabetes. Yeah. So, same thing for blood pressure. You get put on diuretics or beta blockers, and those can increase your risk of type 2 diabetes. So sometimes there's a constant management of blood glucose, carbohydrate intake, protein intake. I'm starting to learn a lot about chrononutrition.
Timing,
so it can be absolutely nerve-wracking for these people. And my heart just goes out to them every time they have to go through this stuff. So,
now, would you say one of the biggest challenges is on the lifting side with their ability to do certain movements, or is it nutrition, or is it kind of, it really depends?
It kind of really depends. So if somebody's having a soreness or fatigue flare up, then we have to pull back on the lifting and maybe modify whatever it is that they're doing because they can't, I can't bend over today. I can't bend my knees. I can't do whatever you were having the experience with your arms. So we may, just have to modify stuff or eliminate lifts or whatever it is they're doing. And then, the nutrition side of that is sometimes we may be in a fat loss phase, or they may have been working really hard to get to a fat loss phase. And then this flare up happens, and I'm kind of like, we're going to have to increase your calories so that you can deal with this. And that can, it can be a mental challenge for them to get through.
Yeah, I bet. I hear what you're saying. I had a client with ulcerative colitis, same thing. You just never knew when it would flare up, and people have digestive issues and people have all sorts of ailments. So this is where having a coach can be really helpful. It sounds like, because you can walk them through. You probably have a broad base of knowledge of strategies to I'll say push through these, or at least get around them, so that you don't just give up, right? Would you say that's somewhat the sentiment there?
Yeah. So I try to tell everybody whenever we start a coaching relationship together, the first call, we'll go over all this stuff, and I try to tell them, listen, I'm not the guy on YouTube. I'm not the guy on the internet who's going to tell you that we're curing stuff. At best, exercise and nutrition at this point in your life is going to be a management tool. And sometimes it's going to feel like we just spent the last 3 months, spinning our wheels, just trying to prevent you from regressing. And that's exactly what it's going to be.
Yeah. But which means the alternative would have been to be sedentary and worse off, would you say?
Yeah.
That's important for people to hear. Because, like you said, there's probably no person on the planet that wouldn't benefit from some form of additional movement and lifting of some kind, right? Yeah. All right. So let's shift to one of the other topics we wanted to talk about. Some of the nuts and bolts here. Protein. Let's talk protein. I always love talking protein. So in the context of strength, of hypertrophy, getting big and strong is what we're talking about. How much protein's optimal? What are some common myths around the consumption of protein that you've dealt with?
Yeah. So how much protein is optimal? So I know we have the magic number of 1 gram per pound of body weight. And I have come to not really like that number very much. So when we look to the science and what the studies are actually saying, I haven't seen one single study where that number is mentioned. It's always a range.
Yes. And
so it can be difficult for people also to really try and consume that much protein. I mean, I have female clients who are 5'2" and 130 pounds, 140 pounds, something like that. And it's, trying to get them to eat 140 pounds of protein or 140 grams of protein per day is really, really hard for them to do. So I think what the science tells us is that as far as gaining muscle or strength, we can be as low as 0.7 grams per pound. So I will often start people there. And as we progress, as we move along, definitely as we go into fat loss phases, I'll titrate that number up to something that's very tolerable. So I kind of like, do you know who Christopher Gardner is, the Stanford researcher?
Yeah, I've heard him. Go tell us about him.
Yeah. So he has, people can look him up, but he has a philosophy when he does these studies, and he does the low carb versus the high carb and all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And so he has a philosophy that I really like to implement, not for everything, but for some stuff, but like this protein, which is limbo titrate quality. So limbo meaning how low can it go? So I'm putting that on myself. How low can I start this person on their protein intake to make them successful? How low can we go? Okay, so we'll start that 0.7. And then, if that's too high still, I have to lower my standards to meet them where they're at. And then once we meet that limbo, once we meet that lowest amount, then we titrate. We start titrating up until we get to the point where I can't take it anymore. I cannot have any more protein. This is it. This is what I can do. And then we start focusing on the quality of that protein.
Cool.
My name is Tony. I'm a strength lifter in my 40s. Thank you to Phil and his Wits and Weights community for helping me learn more about nutrition and how to implement better ideas into my strength training. Phil has a very, very good understanding of macros and chemical compounds and hormones and all that, and he's continuously learning. That's what I like about Phil. He's got a great sense of humor. We'll go back and forth. He's very relaxed, very easy to talk to. One of the greatest things about Phil, in my view, is that he practices what he preaches. He also works out with barbells. He trains heavy, not as heavy as me, but he trains heavy, he lifts, so he knows programs, he knows different variations. So if you talk with him about getting in better shape, or eating better, he's probably going to give you some good advice, and I would strongly recommend you talk with him, and I'll help you out. Thanks.
Yeah, I like that approach. I mean, it's not too different from what I would do and we've talked about, but you have that unique perspective with the limbo in that, I tend to just say, hey, let's shoot for the higher number, knowing that it's a stretch goal, and then titrate to get to that number, kind of keeping that goal in your brain and in your eyes. But I also have seen clients that just struggle. They just struggle. And it's like what you're saying could be an extremely valuable tool for the practical lifestyle that somebody has, which is what we're trying to do here, is work with real people who are trying to get this done. So if you're listening and you don't currently have enough protein and you need to get more protein because you listen to Dustin and me and all these other folks, think about what tool works for you. And if you're getting 0.4, you want to get toward this 0.7 at least, and then just work from there. I've had clients the other opposite direction. Just this week, I had one of my calls and she's at like 1.4. She just loves protein.
Wow.
But she's in a fat loss phase and like, I'm having a little trouble with energy. I'm like, it's because you're kind of trading off too much fat and carbs. So let's go the other way, But that's good that you mentioned that. The 1 gram per pound, I agree, is like, even the guys at Stronger by Science, everyone else will say that you don't really have to be there. It's just maybe an average, a stretch goal. It's an easy rule of thumb, all those things. So that's good that you mentioned that. Now, can people have too much protein?
I don't know that you can really have too much protein. I think it's going to be hard to do, but
like the 3 grams per pound
lifters
and power lifters.
I don't think I would want to be in the same room with that person.
Yeah, exactly. It depends on where you get your protein too.
Yeah.
So all right, so now let's talk you mentioned the blood lipids, preventing heart disease. I know there's always been a little controversy around saturated fats and blood lipids and cholesterol and all these things. Yeah, right. Just a little bit, right? On all directions, right? We see, especially going through. I was on paleo, so you could treat these things like they're programs.
Yeah.
I ate paleo for years, and I was always in that crowd of like, you could eat however much saturated fat you want. The cholesterol is meaningless. And meanwhile, my cholesterol numbers were going up and up. So with the ongoing debate we have around red meat, saturated fat, what is their impact on health outcomes? What is their role in strength training and muscle growth? And then what should people do?
Okay. Yeah. So maybe we'll start with the pros for muscle growth and for athletic performance. So the pros is that red meat, I don't really know about saturated fat, but red meat definitely is a very nutrient dense food. Has a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of stuff that you need, and depending on the individual, you may need to consume more of it, you may need to consume less of it. But as far as building muscle goes, I don't think there is, that kind of seems to be the undisputed champion other than whey protein in the lifting world. The saturated fat.
Oh, you know what? Hold on. Before we go there, you mentioned, some people need more, some people less. Are we talking about like an iron deficiency, or talking about something like that?
Yeah. So iron deficiency would be one. B12. So if you have a more vegetarian style of a diet and you are not focusing on the B12, you're not, that's just something people are not tracking. Adding a little more protein in there may be something that I recommend to those individuals.
Or they could just start eating red meat. So vegetarians who listen,
Yeah.
this is great advice. Just start eating red meat. And no, I'm just kidding.
Just unbridled amounts of red meat. Yes. Yes.
That's your
Yeah.
new
Okay.
vegetarian plan.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so then saturated fat.
Yeah. So saturated fat. Now the saturated fat, I really don't know about the, nutrient density of that versus other fats, but from just an anecdotal perspective, a saturated fat is associated with central adiposity, so fat around your midsection. And for me, I know that when I was much heavier and my trunk circumference was bigger, I felt more stable lifting heavier loads. So as my waist size has gone down, even if I can lift the same amount, a squat or a deadlift or overhead press or whatever it is, I definitely don't feel as stable, and I don't feel like I can brace into my belt as much. So just anecdotally, I think that's that for the saturated fat. And then for saturated fat, always is going to come with the red meat. And so, again, anecdotally, I think there is just something about feeling more energetic and feeling better. So when we look to low carb communities, paleo and keto and carnivore and all that stuff, that seems to be one of the most common traits that people associate with red meat, is just feeling better, having a little bit more energy. So, I definitely think there may be something to that.
Wow, you just gave me a revelation, maybe the listeners as well. So you said that like all these low carb diets that are also high in animal products and fats, hey, I'm feeling great. I'm all of a sudden low carb and I'm feeling great. It may not be the reduction in carbs so much as the increase in some of these nutritious sources of fat and other energy. And and actually the same client that I suggested reduce protein and increase fat just a few days ago is like, hey, I felt like I had more energy. Yeah, there you go. So it's and you say it's anecdotal, but I'm sure there's studies to back it up. We'll make that claim and then we'll have to go find them. But that's
Internet.
good. Yeah, there you go. So actually, or ChatGPT. We're going to get to that later, right?
Yeah.
Actually, it's been a great tool for that kind of research.
Yes.
What about, so red meat, saturated fat. What about sodium, right? There's another one. I actually just heard the guys on Mind Pump talking about it again, how, there's always been a thing with sodium and blood pressure. People get too much. And yet many of us, especially if we eat more whole foods, I think don't get nearly enough. And there's some research that shows that like one fast food meal has as much sodium as a whole week's worth of whole foods, so it's so lopsided from that perspective. Also, sodium's an electrolyte, at least, from my perspective, that's a great thing. I tell people to salt their water and things like that. So let's just settle it here and now, Dustin, right? So the world knows what to do.
Here it is.
If you're a recreational lifter, what's sodium? How much should you get?
Okay. Yes. So most of my day is spent trying to help people reduce the amount of sodium that they're intaking. And I've done a little bit of research into this for just the general gym goer. Okay. So a lot of the recommendations that we're receiving in the recreational lifting community and, the recreational athlete community is coming from social media influencers and other internet forms of information. And they are communicating science to us that just doesn't apply to us. So the sodium recommendations for sport are for people who are generally we're talking about high level athletes here. We're talking marathon runners, professional athletes, D1 level college athletes. That's what all of these recommendations are being based on. So most people aren't even aware of how much salt or sodium they're taking in, despite using tracking apps. That's just not something people are tracking. So high levels of sodium can cause some numerous health issues. Okay. And when we start hearing these recommendations, also combined with the fact that people have no idea how much they're taking in, how much salt they're taking in, it can lead them to start salting food that is already too salty. And that's gonna put you into the danger zone for a lot of these health issues. So some of those things are hypertension. I actually I think I developed a salt sensitivity due to this very issue here. So I was of the crowd to just salt on everything. I need salt because I need that intramuscular fluid, that intercellular volumization. I got to have this. It's touted as some major performance enhancer too.
Sure.
I don't think that that's really the case. So the average person, if you start salting your food, you're taking in too much sodium and too much salt, you may develop hypertension. Even if you don't, so there are people who are salt sensitive, there are people who are not salt sensitive, and you might start taking in a lot of salt and not see any issues with your blood pressure. But that does not mean that you are escaping the effects of this, because as you take in salt, that salt is going to draw in water. And the reason people's blood pressure gets high is because the volume of blood is now higher. So even though your arteries and your veins have the capability to expand with this increased volume, your heart is pumping a larger volume of fluid now.
Yeah.
So your heart has to work harder.
Yeah. So, okay. So I partially stand corrected, but what about people who have, quote unquote, cleaned up their diet, or let's just say they've transitioned, maybe they've worked with you and have shifted to mostly, 80, 90% whole foods and maybe the other 10 or 20% is processed foods. Do they not have to worry about it at that point? Are they still potentially oversalting? Are those the people that need to add salt? Like what's your take on that?
Yeah. So my stance on the salt is, the limbo titrate quality. So from what I understand, I may be wrong, but the obligate amount of sodium for the human body is 500 milligrams a day. Okay.
So it's not 2 or 3 grams. Like
it is not 2 or 3 grams. That is a quarter.
Okay.
That is a quarter of a teaspoon. Yeah. Now, the recommendations that we get from places like the USDA, the American Heart Association, all those other places, it can be a whole other topic, but those recommendations are generally to try and get an entire population to consume less sodium. Not that that is the optimal amount of sodium.
Sure.
Okay. So I really think the lower you can get your sodium, the better off you're going to be. So for most people, if you just try and meet the guidelines, which is 2,300 milligrams per day, I personally like the American Heart Association's guideline, which is 1,500 milligrams or less per day. I think that most people, if you've cleaned up your diet and you're doing all the right things, that's going to be more than enough sodium for you to worry about. You don't need to worry about how much is lost in sweat. 95 to 98% of the sodium that you lose is actually done through your urine, not your sweat.
Okay, this is really good to know, because I'm going to start looking at my salt and asking clients maybe to track a little bit, because I feel like I get 3 grams a day or something like that of salt easily every day. So now, granted, I'm eating more right now than I was. Yeah, that's it. Okay, good to know, man. See, so I learned something every time. I guess on these shows. All right, let's. Is there anything else about blood work you wanted to cover, or we can get into training?
I don't know. We can get into training.
Yeah. All right. So we alluded to a little bit about, we talked about the autoimmune issues, but also a lot of people deal with tendinopathy of some kind. Like this is extremely common from overtraining, overuse, overreach, bad form, whatever. I personally, years ago, had a really terrible squat rack grip, which is a very common thing, right? When I was doing starting strength, learning the low bar, I had to meet with a coach. The coach helped me fix everything. Actually, what's his name? Cody Anino here in Connecticut. I don't know if you know him. He's a starting strength coach.
No.
Helped me fix that. And then the tendinitis went away after I rehabbed it. So, anyway, so we recently chatted about this when I talked about my multi-grip bar for my shoulder, right? Like online, we were talking about that. And that's an equipment change. But what are some strategies you use with clients when it comes to tendinitis recovery and continuing to make progress?
Yeah. So definitely equipment change, definitely some changes in the actual lifts that we're doing. It really depends on where the tendinopathy is and kind of what is usually making it hurt or making it worse. So normally it is something like the squat or the bench press, lots and lots of biceps tendinitis and golfer's elbow, tennis elbow, all that stuff. So what I like to do for those cases is really reduce the frequency of the main lift. So the number of times per week that you're exposed to that main lift, and especially if it's something like squat. So whenever I squat, my shoulder hurts, but nothing else does. We're definitely going to reduce the frequency of that per week. And if I usually will go about half. So if you're squatting 3 times a week, we'll reduce that to 1.5 times per week.
Same intensity, same set of rep scheme?
Same intensity, same rep schemes.
Frequency.
We won't change the program at all. If I do change the program, it normally will be like we'll go from a 3-day program to a 4-day program, but we lift 3 days a week.
Cool. Okay. All right. Yeah, no, that's good to know. You said golfer's elbow, that's what I had before. What is that? Medial epicondylitis? Is that
medial, yeah.
Yeah, right. And maybe tennis elbow some people get on the outside. Shoulder issues, are those pretty common?
Yep, the shoulder issues are very common. So some people will have it in the front, and that's usually biceps tendinitis. And then if you're experiencing it in the back, that can often be a rotator cuff issue.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, definitely working with someone, but it sounds like you shouldn't just rest and stop altogether. I mean, maybe there's a rest period.
Yeah.
You got to keep using it, right?
Yeah. You should not rest and stop. Yeah.
It's good advice. Well, what about cardio? So we're flying through, I like this. We're flying through a bunch of topics. This is cool. Cardio, I don't know, it's sometimes contentious, there's all sorts of extreme, again, social media people, what's his name? Omar Isuf, with, he has the company where he sells clothes, and actually have some of his graphics. One of them is cardio kills, and it has like a person's skeleton with their flesh coming off as they run at a treadmill. Alluding to like the interference effect, which I think we know is a little bit less terrible than we thought it was. So there's the different types of cardio. There's walking, there's high intensity, there's low and medium intensity. How much to do, whether it interferes with lifting, whether you adapt to it, things like that. So how does cardio, what is your general philosophy for how people should treat cardio if their preference is building muscle and size and strength?
Yeah. So my philosophy is that you need to just do your damn cardio.
Okay.
So
elaborate.
All right. Yeah. So how much and of what is going to depend on the person. So I know that when I was a big fat power lifter, I really didn't want to do much cardio. I didn't even do a whole lot of walking.
Yeah.
So, but if we're all in this to improve our health, and a little bit of cardio is not going to decrease that. Yep. I also noticed that with myself and with my clients, your lifting performance doesn't suffer as long as you're not going overboard with stuff. So I like your recommendation, which is half the amount of time of lifting for cardio. Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
I saw that from Mike Matthews, by the way.
Did you? Yeah. Okay. It sounded familiar. I was like, that's good. I think I've heard it, but that's good. I like it. So half the amount of time of lifting. And if you're going to do something high intensity, so I have had clients who really enjoy boot camp stuff. We might even bring that down to a quarter of the time of lifting, because that,
it wipes you out.
Too much high intensity stuff is going to wipe you out. But I think if you're just walking, I really, really enjoy walking. Or you're doing some zone 2 training, which is like you're on the elliptical or the treadmill or a bike or something, and you're working at a pace where you can hold a conversation the entire time, not as easily as we are here, but you wouldn't struggle to have a conversation. I think it's perfectly fine.
Oh, that's what we should be doing, is walking on our treadmills.
Walking on our treadmills. Yes.
Yeah. Get this stuff. I'm probably a little behind right now. Yeah. So, cool. All right. So it's all very reasonable stuff. I mean, we're basically aligned on all this stuff, and I'm glad the listener is getting the reinforcement of these principles. A lot of it is it's like you said, just do your cardio, meaning we don't have to live in extremes. or think that one thing is going to just totally destroy
Mhm.
something else. Like, listen to your body, do the things you enjoy. If you like to play sports, play sports. You're trying to be healthy. If you have a very, very specific goal, sure, you may have to like compromise and make trade-offs, but we're talking general health. So speaking of that, like wearables come into that conversation as well. I'm a techie. I have an Apple Watch. I have an Aura Ring, and I do like them for steps and heart rate, and that's pretty much
Mhm.
it. Plus all the other fun stuff. So Fitbit, Apple Watch, Oura Ring, all those. How can people get the most out of those, in your opinion?
Yeah, so the way to utilize wearable trackers is not to rely on the precision of them. So there's a difference between precision and accuracy. So the precision is how close to the actual number of steps they're able to calculate for the day. And then the accuracy is how often or how close of a repeatable measure they can get. So wearable trackers are just not that precise. I do a lot of testing for my clients, and I wear a bunch of different stuff. So I have an Apple Watch that is pretty much all the time, and I base everything else off of the Apple Watch because that seems to be kind of the most consistent thing.
Sure.
So I recently wore a Amazon Halo, and the amount of steps, the difference between the amount of steps per day between the two of them was almost 6,000 steps.
Okay. Wow.
However, that being said, they were both very, very consistent in being 6,000 steps off per day. So if you're utilizing these to track your steps or track your calorie expenditure per workout, or maybe your heart rate or anything like that, don't rely on the actual number that this thing is giving to you. But just like our weight, is we're looking for trends over time.
Sure. Good. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Precision versus accuracy. I've seen the same when it comes to like body fat percentage. You know, you really can't rely on any of those devices.
Yeah,
but,
everything.
Yeah, but the trend is not bad if you
Mhm.
do it repeatedly over time under the same conditions.
Yeah. Even a DEXA, even a DEXA,
exactly.
Other than MRI or somebody
Autopsy.
autopsy,
Yeah.
everything is wrong.
It's true. It's true. People need to know that.
Yeah.
And especially they need to know it because I don't want you getting super excited when that data says something, and conversely super depressed when it says something, when both could be completely wrong.
Yeah.
So,
Note on the Amazon Halo. So the app that it comes with actually has a really, really good body fat estimator. So it actually uses the camera on your phone, and you stand in front of the camera. So you set it up on a tripod or on the table or something, and it will actually take pictures of you front, side, back, and give you an estimate of your body fat score. And it seems to be pretty close to even the Navy standard or even body calipers. It's really, really accurate.
Wow. And I could see why that might be when you use that high resolution camera combined with AI, maybe, and you could see those same measurements you'd be taking with tape. But wow, that's cool. I didn't know that. I'm going to look into that. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's the one thing I like about it. Everything else, I don't care.
Does it require the Halo though? Because it almost sounds like you just do that with a camera and feed it into their software somehow.
Yeah, you could probably just download the app and just do it with the camera. I don't know that it requires the Halo.
I'm going to look into that, man. That could be a cool tool. Yeah.
It's very cool. I stopped taping myself.
Okay. That could be a game changer, man. Thanks. That's good. Thank you. Selfishly to me, I act like a bunch of people aren't listening to this, but the people listening to it are going to love it too. So I know we have a couple minutes left. I do have a hard stop at 3, and you may as well. But the AI stuff. I mean, what's your take on that? You know, there's a lot of discussions going on about, are we going to stop thinking, you know, when we use these things, it's just going to do all our work for us. Like, what's your take on how we use things like ChatGPT and Bing and Bard and all this stuff?
Yeah. So right now I'm loving ChatGPT. I think a lot of the information that it's given me is sound, and it's helping me bypass the normal channels where people would usually go to get information on nutrition and health and all that stuff. And actually I'm getting to the scientists and to the research, and you're not getting it secondhand from somebody. And so I think that people out there can really utilize ChatGPT if you're just starting out into this and you are kind of listening to a lot of different takes on stuff like the saturated fat. Just start asking the question anytime somebody makes a claim of something, just ask, is that true? And you can go to ChatGPT, you can pose a question, and a lot of the answers that I get from ChatGPT are very, very good. They're not black and white, yes or no. They have a lot of nuance to them. You can also ask it to cite you sources.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go and look for yourself. Maybe you find something on a topic that's very long. Maybe you find a study. You can actually click the web address, copy the web address, post it into the ChatGPT bar, and ask it to summarize this for you. And it does a fairly decent job at summaries. It will tend to summarize one aspect instead of the whole thing, the totality of it. So
right.
People have to keep that in mind.
And you can tell it to do it like Mr. T.
You can tell it to do it like Mr. T or Snoop Dogg. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, listen, I mean, when it comes to technology and tools, I'm a techie, always have been, with an engineering background, and technology is always going to lead to amazing new things and terrible new things. It just always will, right? And the good in the world, and those of us who want to do good and and make an impact, we can try to leverage those to the best our ability to maximize that. I agree. So, okay, I want to ask you this. I asked of all guests, if you've been listening to my show at all, I think you know what questions was coming.
Yeah.
What question did you wish I had asked, and what is your answer?
Who played the best Batman, and why is it Ben Affleck?
Very specific question. That's a leading question, though.
It's a leading question. Wow.
Who played the best? Because my wife would disagree. She would say it's who was from. It was Michael Keaton was the original in the early 90s.
So yes, but that is a different question. Who is Batman? Michael Keaton is Batman.
Oh,
especially
who plays the best Batman?
Who plays the best Batman? Whose Batman was the best? I think it's Ben Affleck, because that is the Batman that is more closely related to the DC comic than anything else. That's the Batman who's dropping people off of roofs and chaining them up to the radiator and, burning them with an iron in the shape of a bat to interrogate them to get information. So I really like his Batman. But yeah, like,
what about Christian Bale?
Christian Bale,
pretty brutal.
His was good. I mean, I like it, but I feel like his Batman is more of a Robin, not Batman, because it's kind of acrobatic, and he's a little bit on the smaller side. Ben Affleck is a big dude.
Fair enough.
And so like, the things that a real Batman would have to, like, he'd have to be that big. You know what I mean?
Speaking of big, what's the show? They made one season. Is it Reacher? The new Reacher that came out last year?
Yeah.
You see that guy's physique?
Yeah.
Impressive. I mean, I think he's natural. He kind of, the proportions seem natural to me, and he says he is, but you know how these things go, right?
Yeah.
And plus he's like 6'4", so that helps.
Yeah.
How tall are you, Dustin?
I'm 5'10".
5'10". All right. So we're about the same. We're about the same height. I have a little ways to go on the size. So, all right. Cool. Great, man. So where can listeners learn more about you and your work?
So I am basically only on Facebook, because I am just not a big social media person. So they can find me there and message me, and if they have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
That's your personal profile, Dustin Lambert?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. We'll link that in the show notes. And awesome, man. Well, this has been a fun conversation. We covered a lot of different topics, and you were awesome. Your expertise shined through. The listener, I'm sure, is going to get a ton of value from what you just heard. May have to listen to it again with everything we covered. So thank you again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.